Is Ukraine attacking across the front lines? Just what is Russia doing in response? Even launching attacks of its own? And how is the flooding from the destruction of the dam impacting operations? We're going to get into all of it right now. It is June 8th, 2023. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's get into it. Okay, first, we're going to take a look at the control map. And bear in mind, this was only updated yesterday at around 10 a.m. The major changes actually taking place in and around Bakhmut. What you can see here is that there's been some level of repositioning outside of the Burkiva Reservoir to the north. Again, this is not that significant. We're not seeing significant territory or significant lines of control changing hands. This is more of a repositioning. You can see, again, some withdrawal. Basically, it looks like Russian forces have primarily been knocked out of this wooded area here. They probably established some level of defensive lines or were attempting to, and Ukrainian forces probably pushed them back before they could really lock anything in. But as we've talked about, the longer these lines get stable, the harder it is to dislodge enemy forces. But when we look to the south near Andriivka, you can see that there's been a change of fairly significant where you can see Russian forces have taken control of this rail line and roadway, and then you can see that Ukrainian forces have continued to liberate along this line, forcing Russian forces back. And you can see it's a fairly strong defensive position. Basically, you have the canal forming a natural obstacle, you have a road, you have a train line, and then you have a windbreak of trees along it. And almost certainly, Russian forces are using this tree line to build their entrenched positions, and they are going to basically, I suspect Ukraine is probably turning this into a giant trench clearing operation, attempting to force the Russians from this line as they go down into Kurdyumivka. This is, again, some significant progress, but what I am not seeing that I really thought I would see at this point is a war of maneuver. In NATO doctrine, right, you use your maneuver forces to decisively punch through enemy lines, breaking their lines, and then you exploit that using your mechanized forces. So instead of a broad swath of pressure being applied, it's sort of basically, think of it like two ways to pop a balloon. You could sit on the balloon, right, and apply a broad force across the entire surface, and then eventually it pops. This is sort of a very Russian way of war, and it's what we've seen Russia attempt to do with its broad-based assaults. But the other way to pop a balloon, the NATO way to solve this problem, is to use a sharp object. You need a concentrated area of force with a sufficient amount of energy behind it to penetrate that defensive surface, break that, and then enter and exploit the backfield. And that is what we haven't yet seen from Ukrainian forces. Again, this could be a sort of early shaping. I don't want to call it a shaping operation, but this could be a preparatory part. This could be them attempting to find where they are going to break Russian lines, and they have brigades waiting in the back field to exploit that breakthrough. Anyway, if you guys are interested in the all the news that we can't get to here, you can see that even 2 days ago, we were one of actually the earlier outlets to report the breaking of the dam. Flooding in Kherson. If you're interested in getting this level of update, you should definitely check out combatvetnews.com. And if you want to support the channel, you can join the less than 1% of viewers of this content who support us and become members. They get access to an exclusive room on the Discord, and more importantly, they get access to the weekly drops of my analysis of the combat footage coming out of the conflict. And you know, this week is going to have some absolutely bananas footage, and tomorrow the videos drop and we're going to be looking at all of it, breaking down what's going on in this conflict. And it's going to be, we're going to get a lot of insight into what's happening on the ground. So if you want to join and become a member and get access to that, yeah, absolutely. combatvetnews.com is the place. When we look at the combat map, this is where things get even more interesting. As of 19 minutes ago, the Deputy Minister of Defense of Ukraine is actually reporting where they are launching some offensive actions. They describe it as clashes, but it's unique because you can see that, again, 4 hours ago, right, you have Russia conducting 30 combat actions. Simultaneously, Ukraine is conducting some level of combat actions in a number of locations. And the fact that Ukraine is announcing this probably tells us that it's no secret, right? So the three really that I think are most significant are here outside of Orkiv. You have, of course, south of Velka Novosilka, and up here around Marinka. So Marinka, I think this is probably a counter operation against offensive efforts being put in by Chechen special forces, trying to fix them or really probably eliminate them as a battlefield element. But the two that I think are most important are here and here. And the reason is, as we've discussed, this chunk of territory is very vulnerable to it's vulnerable to Russia. And the goal of Ukrainian forces is probably going to be to drive to Melitopol and drive to Mariupol and push and cut off these Russian forces here. This is favorable terrain to maneuver warfare. It's open. It doesn't have a lot of forest or major urban areas, so it can be easily liberated once lines are broken. It's also, Russian forces cannot retreat. They will have to be resupplied via the ports, which Ukraine has been working to destroy. And you can see, right, that Russian aircraft are trying to break this offensive. At least 3 reports of Russian aircraft around in this Zaporizhzhia region. But again, Russia has a fairly limited air defense base, and this is more or less how you would expect this to go, right? Where the forces are going to clash, they're going to meet, they're going to achieve some level of potentially stalemate, and then at the decisive point of battle, according to NATO doctrine, the reserve is going to be committed, and it's going to tip the scales in the favor of the attacker. And that's what we're probably seeing here. So that while Russian aviation is probably pounding Ukrainian positions, you hope that Ukrainian air defenses, man-pads, will be able to apply enough pressure on these aircraft and attrit these aircraft so that eventually, when the Russian forces start to really feel the pressure, they are exhausted, and Ukrainian forces instead get their reserve element committed and become stronger, right? It's sort of like one boxer, in the 8th round, both boxers are exhausted, and then one boxer gets a big drink of like Gatorade or something, and suddenly is perked back up and ready to throw hard at their exhausted opponent. The other regions that I gotta say I have concerns that I'm seeing a lot of Ukrainian forces commit to is around Bakhmut, right? This is you can see the spread of offensive work, I think, is too large, even for the 9 brigades they have in action. The reason is because they're not mutually reinforcing. Units in Bakhmut cannot and are not going to reinforce units here in Zaporizhzhia, right? They are different sectors. And so creating this broad-based front, I think, is a mistake. I think the pressure should be vastly increased on forces here, and that there should be a real disciplining. Far fewer offensive work should be being done in Bakhmut, only enough to pin these remaining forces in place as the main body of the offensive concentrates in Zaporizhzhia. That's at least my my interpretation as that's at least my armchair quarterbacking. And that could be what's happening, right? There's no scale specified. These could be squad and platoon attacks, and these could be brigade offensives. We don't know that. But you can see, again, there's continued progress around Bakhmut. So some of these are producing returns, and it's highly possible that, again, Ukraine is in the wait and see phase. They think someone's going to break somewhere, and when they do, you're going to see these reserve brigades get committed. So the other thing that I thought was really interesting that I wanted to point out is right here, War Mapper reporting that Russia may have miscalculated pretty badly in flooding the Kherson region because the flooding seems to be occurring on the left bank of the river, the southern bank, the bank in which the Russian forces are staged. This is Russian-occupied territory that's been primarily flooded. And while it increases the natural obstacle in either case, Russia, for propaganda purposes, it's not a good look by Russia. These are regions that, remember, Russia technically believes are part of Russian sovereign territory. So the fact that you're seeing large-scale flooding induced by Russia in these regions is actually a problematic political and propaganda outcome for them. And again, it's not clear that there was ever really a danger of Ukrainian forces crossing at scale in Kherson. So it remains to be seen what Russia thought they were going to achieve by this, other than simply engaging in a reprisal against civilians. It's honestly such a bad miscalculation that even by Russian standards. So I'll be very curious if there's any more data that comes out about who exactly made these decisions and what the timeline of events was that resulted in this dam being destroyed. Anyway, guys, that is all I had. As always, thank you to our Colonel and Lieutenant tier members on combatvetnews.com. You guys are the ones who enable me to do this. I can't emphasize that enough. And I hope that many of you come over and join us on combatvetnews.com if you haven't already. And I'll see you guys in the next one.